Hey guys, it's Melanie and Clint, and our very special guest, Caleb Roehrig, the author of Death Prefers Blondes, as well as several other books you may see back here. Oh, I love that new cover.
Yeah, I know. It's very shiny. You can see my ring light whenever I hold it up. Oh, wait.
It is very shiny, but it's really pretty. I just like the shade of that color.
I know. It's like a teal. I really like it.
And it kind of gives me Agatha Christie vibes.
I know. Well, they've done. Sorry, I keep like leaning out of the frame. They have redesigned the paperbacks for my last two titles, and they've done this like really great kind of like throwback.
I know.
I love that one.
60s, yeah. Like I really love it. It's very like How to Steal a Million or the original. My friend Adam Sass called it That Darn Cat Burglar, which I love.
I have White Rabbit's other cover sitting in my Amazon cart right now whenever I can have money. Just because I like that cover too.
Yeah.
I like that hardback. Because what I found funny is when she introduced me to Death Prefers Blondes. And
I introduced everybody to this.
I looked at the author. I had White Rabbit at the house.
Oh, no kidding.
Because I had found it at Half Price Books, like $3, and it was just like, this is an interesting premise. I'll give it a try. Out of the house, she starts talking about that, and I'm looking over at my bookshelf like, I just remember seeing that name.
Ha, that's so funny. Yeah, I loved the hardcover. Like, I loved the design that they did for that. It gave me like this very like throwback Hardy Boys kind of a
Yes.
Yeah, it was exactly the kind of book that I would have picked. Like, cause I love shopping at like vintage bookstores, used bookstores, finding like old and out of print titles. I collect pulp novels. In fact, you can see I have my collection of like mid-century pulp detective fiction up there, and I love collecting these books that are out of print. And it just had that look about it, so I loved it. But I actually really do think that the redesign, I think it's perfect. I think it really suits the book. So.
So because I love Death Prefers Blondes so much, and I know that book covers don't really represent necessarily the book.
Yeah.
But this book cover has inspired me to purchase other books that have covers similar.
Oh,
and
great.
I'm like, I love the book, this book, and this cover reminds me of this book, so I'm going to get this book. And then there's nothing like, but
that makes me so happy. Thank you.
Yeah, I have like it's a Louise Duncan book, and it's like a red wig and cap.
Yeah.
And there's another one that's like.
Do you remember what it's called? Because she's a huge influence of mine.
Hold on, let me grab it.
Yeah, and it was in one of her book outlet hauls that she pulled it out. She's like, I got this. Reach behind her because it looks like this.
Yeah, I love it.
She's like, I don't even know what it's about, but it looks like this.
I found a copy of I Know What You Did Last Summer in my school library in 8th grade or something, and I read it. It's very dated now. Like it's dated. It's a dated story, but it's still really great. She's a great writer.
Summer of Fear.
Summer of Fear is a good one. Yes.
And then the other book I picked up was Scars Like Wings.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Look at that. Okay, well, Summer of Fear is really good. I read that one just a couple of years ago.
But both of these books I got because of the cover of
I love it.
I only got this one because this is one of my favorite 90s horror films. So I'm like, I wanted to read and compare.
The movie is very different. Like you'll see where all the inspiration came from, like how they adapted it into the movie. But the book, like that, I read it in 8th grade. It blew my 13-year-old mind. I had no idea what I was in for. It was really great though. And thank you.
I mean, we've already gotten like multiple people to love Death Prefers Blondes now.
Yes, I've introduced so many people to this book. It's just when I first heard the premise of this book, I was like, oh, well, that's going to be fun. And it just seemed like a fun, silly book. And then I read it and I was just like, oh, it gave me every freaking emotion. I was just like, heart racing. I was crying. I was laughing. It was just like so much like I went through, I think, every possible emotion while reading this book. And it was
Thank
funny
you.
because for me, this was a reread. And I'm like talking about it in my little Twitter book group. And I was just like, oh my gosh, even though I know everything that's coming up, it's still doing the same thing to me. My heart was
Oh.
still racing, even though I knew what was going to happen. I was still like,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I will be completely honest. When Mel first described it as a book that she thinks I would like, I was like, I don't know. I'm very critical when books bring in drag queens.
Sure, yeah.
She does do drag. I'm like, I'm very critical.
Yeah.
And I'm reading this and I'm like, I'm bawling my eyes out because the group reminds me of my drag family
Yeah.
so much. I could pinpoint each member of my drag family as one of the characters.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
it's just like I started bawling because I was like, that happened to us.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thanks. That means a lot to me.
Her and I'm like, I hate you now. Now I have to read every book of his.
That's how I
trust
get
my
you.
recommendations now.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, thanks. Yeah, it was important to me that I think for a lot of reasons it was really important to me to take those characters very seriously. It's a very long story, but it actually started out as a script. I wrote it as a screenplay like 10 years ago, but I don't know how to write screenplays, so it was garbage. But I loved the premise, and I loved the universe that I'd created in these characters. So when I sat down to adapt it into a novel, I had to. I think in the original it was mostly focused just on Margot, and the drag queens are sort of like background characters. And when I decided to adapt it, I was like, I really need to give them more interiority. I really need to explore their life. I need to explore what their friendship means in the whole greater context, with Margot included, as part of the unit. And so it kind of became, for me, sort of a love letter to found family, and also my love letter to LA, because I lived in LA for 10 years, and it was like I'm originally from Michigan. I have my coffee mug with my Michigan. I'm originally from Michigan, so moving all the way across the country, it was really hard for me to be that far away from my support group. And I ended up finding new friends and finding a huge support group there. And so this is very much about that experience too.
So I'd like to know, because that kind of made me think about Leaf, and I'm curious, which character do you like feel more closely represents you? Like, do you see yourself as any of these characters?
I mean, a little bit in all of them, like there is no one character that really fits my experience. Like it's not like as a one-to-one, because I would say that, his particular experience was very much of trying to sort of like escape a really oppressive home life, and I didn't have that. For me, it was I moved to LA because I wanted to be an actor, and like I was going to pursue my career, and I did. I acted for a while, but then I ended up working sort of production in TV, and then life changes. But it was more so for his experience in particular. It was very much about finding that crucial support network, moving and finding a critical support network, and really being able to be yourself for the first time. That's what that was about for me. But I feel like, with all of them, there's a lot of push and pull with each of them in terms of their identity and how they negotiate that against sort of the context of the environment that they're thrust into, because all of them are, and this is the thing about YA, is that these are young characters who don't really get to choose their environment. And this is, for Joaquin, his whole storyline is about how his brother, who's trying to do the best he can for him, isn't listening to him, keeps pushing him into this environment where he has no friends and no support. And so it's for all of them, it's about figuring out how they can create their own safe environment despite not having full control over their own circumstances, which I think is very relatable for teenagers.
I also really love how, well, like you said, originally it was going to be about Margot and all the queens were going to be like side characters, I love how they're not really your typical side characters. Like they all have their story. They all have their own problems and their own things going on, and we get to see from their perspectives. And I love every one of these characters so much. Like I've connected with all of them, and I'm like, I want to be their friends.
And I just want to say how realistic they are as well. As like going back to the fact that I do drag,
Yeah.
certain comments and certain jokes were made here and there that I'm like when the two boys were in the back of the trunk and one thinks and it says, I should have used stronger duct tape or something like that. Sort of jokes like that in my head, I was like, oh, it's so true though.
Yeah.
It's so real.
Well, and this is the thing too, is that I feel like something that is important to me is also that feminine boys be taken more seriously, especially in books about like gay teenagers, because I feel like for a long time, certainly during like the 90s and the early 2000s, it was very much anytime you saw a gay character, if it was on TV or in the movies, it was played by a straight actor, and it was always very much like this is there's gay guys can be normal also, and I'm like it always sat really bad with me, because I was like, well, what message does that send to all of the gay boys who whose normal doesn't look like this, who don't look or act that way? And I feel like it does a disservice to, and we do a disservice to ourselves to constantly allow, if you're going to have feminine characters, they're always comic relief. They're just jokes, or they're like a best friend who doesn't really have any sort of presence in the story beyond just sort of being a sounding board and being like having some wisecracks. And so I really wanted to, I wanted to have these characters for whom a lot of time, like, that sense of humor is a defense mechanism, and it's a part of who you are, but it's also, I don't know. I feel like there's a very specific kind of person that like drag queens, like drag culture and drag queens, like they're a very specific kind of person, and it's a very specific kind of strength. And I really wanted to capture that and reflect it. So I really wanted them to be understood by the reader as like, these are teenagers, these are real people, they are strong in ways that you won't understand and maybe won't expect, but they are, but they also have this side to them as well. And I really wanted to showcase that and embrace it and make this something that uplifted those kids.
Well, see, I've related this book to, I call it the queer as folk for teenagers.
Yeah.
Drag queens, because in a sense, the way that you describe the characters is like what Queer as Folk did for the queer community as a TV show in itself.
Yeah.
As like showing every version of us, and not a single one of us are the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of what you did with the drag queens.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I tried really hard. I wanted to, when I decided to adapt it, and I knew what that meant would be taking these characters that, like I said, in the kind of original version, like the way that I first conceived of it, they kind of, they came in, they functioned as a unit. They were a team. They came in, they were mostly in the background. There were never, I think there was only one scene in this like terrible screenplay between Margot and I think the Axel character, where it was just the two of them, but otherwise they only came in as a group. And I was like, when I was going to write it, I was like, I need to really focus on them. I need to give them, and each one of them needs to have their own spotlight, which means each one of them needs to have their own struggle, and each one of them needs to have their own like complete person, so it was fun. It was fun to sort of to take that on and to give them all that, to make them real, so to speak.
And it was nice to see that you didn't shy away from like, okay, I'm bad with remembering which character's which in my head, because I just love them all. They kind of blend with the drag family and stuff. But what's his name's drag mom? Love how you didn't shy away from the drug use, the alcohol, and the abuse and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because that is something that does happen to some of the older generation of drag queens.
Sure.
So I liked how refreshing it was to see it taken in a serious way.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, again, it was important to me that I I don't know, some of it too is just I wanted to be realistic about some of this stuff, and I wanted to talk about, because in a lot of ways, you're, especially from George's generation, you're talking about people who really had to form their own support systems, who were completely abandoned by the powers that are supposed to organize to protect you, and they really had to cleave together and form their own support network. And so there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of damage from that, and I really wanted to write about. I also want to show the legacy of what that means about sort of the inheritance of an understanding of community and a sense of protecting each other and caring for each other, and how that is sort of a very specific, that's very specific to the queer experience, I think, across the board, not just in the drag world. I think especially in the drag world, but across the board in the queer community, there is a real sense of learning to take care of each other, because that found family thing is so crucial and so important.
Somebody asked me in a comment on my most recent vlog, what book would be a book, from now that I would have liked to have had as a younger person. And the first book I thought of was Death of First Wands, because, I mean, I totally would have wanted to be Margot. I mean, she kicks butt. She is smart, and also she makes being bi not just like it's this secret thing. It's like, okay, I'm seeing guys, but at the same time, every once in a while I see it, but that's a secret. And so it's just a matter of fact with her. It's not a hidden heart. And I like that because, well, growing up at, my time, that was how things were, it was like, bi was not, I don't even know that there was a word for it then. It was just, you don't do that.
Right.
And I like how it's not bam in your face, but it's like, it's just a matter of fact. It's just who she is, and that's just who I am. And that's a book that I would have liked to have had as my young teenage self.
I mean, even me as a teenager, hearing the word bi and stuff, most people were like, you're just really gay and you're just trying to pass yourself off that you're not. Or you're straight, they're going through a phase.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I it's funny because of course when I initially wrote the screenplay 10 years ago, Margot was just going to be straight, because back at that time I didn't think a queer character could anchor a story, or I didn't think that it would be accepted if I tried to do that. And so when I was adapting it, a friend of mine, I was sort of trying to describe the plot to a friend. I was like, it's really complicated. But I sort of explained it, and she said, oh, and she's bi, right? And I was like, oh, you know what? I think maybe she is. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I actually really like that. I really like, it ended up 100% being the right choice, because I really wanted those core characters to all have that in common, to have that aspect of identity in common, that they are all queer in some way, and that this is, so they have each one of them has a specific relationship to their own queerness, but they relate to each other in a specific way because of this shared commonality. So I did, because every time you write a character like that, you do have to think about, is this something that they've accepted about themselves? Is this something that they talk about? Is this something that they don't, and why not? Is this somebody who is out? Is this somebody who's not out? And so I kind of tried to approach it differently with each character and give them sort of a different aspect of it. And for Margot, I wanted it to be something that she is fully at peace with. This is not something she feels the need to explain to anybody. This is not something she needs to explain to herself. It's just who she is. And it felt realistic to me that it wouldn't come up between her and her father. I still don't know if her father knows or not. I sort of assume that he does, but their relationship was such that I didn't think it needed to be on the page. Like, I didn't think I needed a conversation between them on the page because she didn't need his approval or his acceptance for that. And it was important to me to just show that this was an aspect of her independence, an aspect of her personality, is that this is something she didn't need his approval. She had her own approval.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And I also love the fact that we never see faux queens actually accepted, and you put the main character as a faux queen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like it puts the whole Victoria like to the forefront.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of friends who are faux queens.
Yeah.
I introduced one of my best friends to the queer community, and that's how she discovered she's pansexual, and she does faux queen because it's where she gets her strength to actually live sing.
Yeah.
If she's dressed up, if she's herself, she can't.
That's really great.
So to see a character in the forefront being not only queer, but actually showing a different side of drag that isn't normally accepted.
Right.
A lot of people are like, oh, women can't do drag. Sometimes they do it better than us.
Oh, listen, I when I was sort of learning drag, I learned a lot of techniques from cis women who do like drag tutorials, and some of them are just unreal. Like, it's unbelievable.
I'm just like, God, you've changed your face too much. I'm like, what?
I'm like, come on, help.
I feel that way when I look at your Instagram pictures. I was like, I need makeup tips from him because your makeup is just like awesome. And I'm just like, how do you get your eyes to do that?
Oh my gosh. Well, the eyes are the hardest part for me because I have like no lid space whatsoever. So I'm like,
I have hooded eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the issue. Is that I'm looking at these and they're like, yeah, and then you like draw like the new crease on. I'm like, oh sure, I'll do that. And I'm like, that's like,
I'm like, I have no room for a crease.
Exactly. I'm like,
I haven't figured out the crease thing at all.
Yeah. No, but so that came about because when the hardcover was releasing, my marketing team had this whole idea where they're like, we're going to do an online quiz, and people can take it and find out which queen they are, and they're like, you just write a quiz. Oh, and then also submit some pictures of yourself in drag as the characters. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, sure, this is a project that I'm really interested to tackle, but I knew nothing. Like, I knew stage makeup because I studied the theater, but I didn't know anything about drag. So I was like, oh, okay, but this will be a fun project. So I started like watching all these tutorials, and then I was like, oh, and then I'm like making a list of things I need to buy, and I'm like, this is an expensive hobby. So I'm like, I gotta have this.
It really is.
Yeah, I've got to have like 3 kinds of foundation. I've got to have setting powder. I got to have contour. I got to have this. I got to have that.
Yeah, at least like $100 just for the shape of the face. That's not including eyeshadows, lipsticks, eyeliners, mascara, lashes.
And then the wigs, because it was really important, because in the book, I have each of these characters has a very specific like color. The color motifs are really important to me when I was writing it, and each queen has a color that is distinctly hers. And this came about because when I first conceived of the story, I was like a teenager. I was really into like old movies and old TV, and I could go through the whole story because the character of Margot came to me from an episode of The Lucy Show, and then I was watching. I don't know if you've ever seen. I don't know if you're fans of Alfred Hitchcock, but his final film, Family Plot. A lot of his like later stuff is a little, but Family Plot is actually a really great movie. It's like
it really is.
Yeah, 1976 or something. Opens with Karen Black robbing a jewelry store, and she's wearing this big dramatic like black trench coat and this black Stetson hat, and she's got these big sunglasses on and this really platinum blonde wig, and
I didn't even think of that.
It's high drag, and I have a picture of it on my phone somewhere. I'm also getting text messages, so I'm gonna try to like I'll show it to you. You'll see all of the private text messages I'm getting. But it's a really dramatic look. It's a really dramatic silhouette, and I suddenly had this idea for like, what if I had 5 characters that are all dressed exactly like this, and the only thing that's different about them is the wig. Like, the wig is like a different color. So you've got the lead, who is this blonde character, and then you'll have one that's like a red and one that's a blue.
Neon green, a purple.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also,
So,
I Did you go with the certain colors because as reading it, seeing the different personality types of the people wearing the wigs, I related it to what each of the stripes mean.
You know what? I had not
Kind of blended with the way that they are as people.
No, that totally, I didn't even think about it. At the time, it was more, I just wanted to have colors that contrasted really sharply with each other. So I wanted it to be really vibrant. And I guess I did want it to be kind of like a rainbowy effect when they were all together, but I didn't really think about it in terms of sort of correlating it to the meaning of the stripes from the original Pride flag. But that's really interesting.
As I was reading, I was like, well, this fits for this, and this fits for this, and they're acting out this. So I'm like, I wonder.
Oh my gosh! Well, I'm smarter than I thought. Turns out I'm a genius.
And you're talking about the color combinations. That's why another reason why I relate it to my drag family. Each of us have our own signature colors.
Oh,
like in drag, I wear mainly a lot of blue. My drag sister's a lot of green. I have a drag sister's a lot of purple. The matriarch of our family wears a lot of red.
Oh, I love it.
Each of us have our own signature colors.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that each one had their signature color. Even if it wasn't just a wig, it was like, bam, you know who it is when they mention that color of the wig without having to mention a name.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's so cool.
So I know you've talked about like you're originally writing this as like a screenplay.
Yeah.
And I have thought so many times while I was reading it, I want to see this book in a movie.
I do too.
Is that something that could possibly be in, a future? Or
I mean, fingers crossed. I have had, I've had interest expressed. Nothing that has been concrete. Nothing that is like I can't say it's been optioned. But
I'm gonna die. Whenever you make that announcement, I'm just gonna.
It's a Queer Ocean's 8, so come on now, just with a lot more comedy in it, and it would like freaking sell out a box office just with the thought of putting it in that type of a connotation. The amount of queer people we have that would instantly go see this.
I know. Well, I think I really do think that it's time for some really kind of celebratory queer content that is also a little subversive, because I feel like we still sort of a lot of the queer like stuff that we see adapted for film and TV. The stories are still fairly like they're safe, which isn't to say that these are bad, like that they're bad. It's just that we're still sort of seeing some of the same kinds of stories adapted, and I'd like to, yeah. And
too many coming out stories.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, here's the thing. I think we'll always need coming out stories because coming out is sort of still an integral part of the queer experience, and it changes, with every generation. Everything, it always changes. But I think that I do think that we need to see. I still think that part of the problem is we're trying to tell stories that we think straight people are going to be comfortable with, rather than trying to encourage straight people to become comfortable with other kinds of stories. Do you know what I mean? Like,
queer as folk. We need more queer as folk to like jump in and like punch you kind of without actually like physically punching, but like throwing it out there going, hey, this is the real us.
I want to see.
We're not going to straighten ourselves for you.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want to see more queer content that is tailored specifically for queer audiences. I'd also like, it's because it's like, I want straight people to read my books. I want them to pick these up, and I want them to see themselves in these characters as well. I want them to understand that, these are, they're still facing like a lot of the core struggles are still very relatable. Like, just because they have this other aspect to who they are doesn't make them less relatable. Like they don't. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm tired of seeing gay characters that have to look and act and walk and talk like straight people in order to be seen as relatable. I would really like to see something. I'd like to see gay boys that look like me, that act like me. I want to see a little more of that, please.
Yeah, I would love, as someone who's not your stereotypical like body shape and stuff, like we don't have a lot of queer characters that aren't your skinny white boys or the jock white boys type thing. I would love to see more of us. I don't even consider myself a bear, but more bears or like more people like Titus Andromeda. Let's go like the body shape of that, just something more normal. Like how women have been trying to fight for natural body shapes to be shown. Why can't we have a queer character that just happens to have a stomach?
Yeah. I completely agree with you. Actually, somebody in the comments I saw brought up Drag Teen by Jeffrey Self. And his main character is, there it is. Yeah, and that, I don't know if you've read that. It's a really cute story. But his main character is exactly that. And I thought it was brilliant because it really was this is a character who is feminine. This is a character who is not your stereotypical like jock insta-gay. And it is very much a story of him finding himself and being empowered by doing drag. And I was like, I thought that was a really smart and really meaningful. And I think that's the kind of message that will be really important to kids who don't see themselves because of all of this same stuff.
Talking about consuming this in other forms, is there going to be an audiobook? Because I really want to listen to this as well.
Oh, there is an audiobook.
There is?
Yeah, it didn't come out at the same time as the paperback, but it is, and the narrator's name is, I want to say it's Jennifer. I'm so bad. I should know this, but there is an audiobook. I have to look it up to figure out to tell you who the narrator is, but
so I'm going to be purchasing an audiobook just to have it when I need just a little bit of a pick-me-up.
Yeah.
What is this on? Because
it's on Audible. Let's see, who is the narrator? Therese Plummer, that's who it is. Sorry. Therese Plummer narrates Death Prefers Blondes, the audiobook. And so it's Audible. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on audible.com. I forget when it was released, but it did not come out at the same time that the book was released.
I don't have Audible, but I might have to get it for this because my husband doesn't like physically read books at all. Like he'll listen to audiobooks. I'm not interested in doing that, and so I'm always reading multiple books at a time, and one of them is usually listening to an audiobook with him. And I rave about this book, and I'm like, I want him to read it, but he doesn't have the time for physically reading it. So I'm like, he needs an audiobook of it.
It came out 3 days after my 29th birthday.
Oh my gosh. Well, happy belated birthday.
Because it came out July 23rd, 2019.
Oh my gosh, was it that long ago?
Because
it's a year ago.
I just turned 30 on the 20th.
Oh, well, congratulations.
I'm like, new decade.
Yeah.
But I like her voice because I just clicked on the sample and I recognize her voice from audiobooks.
Oh, great. Good. Yeah, I wasn't.
And it's one that you will like, Mel.
Excellent. Good.
It's like add to wish list because I have no credits right now. So
like in audiobooks, so I was, as I said, I listen to, I consume multiple books at a time. And so I was listening to the audiobook of Dragonfly and Amber by Diana Gabaldon. Oh. And I was physically reading Death Prefers Blondes, like rereading it. And the first time I read Death Prefers Blondes, and I got to the part with Georgia, in my head, her voice was very old Hollywood, over the top kind of, and,
she was Scarlett O'Hara in my head.
Yeah.
But then when I had been listening to Dragonfly and Amber and rereading this, she suddenly had a Scottish accent. I was like, Georgia is Scottish now.
That's awesome.
It was funny because that was the only character that it did that with. Georgia had this very Scottish accent. I guess it's because of like when you first introduced to her and she's high as a kite.
Yeah.
Her words are all slurred.
Yeah.
And so you get like that. And it kind of reminded me of the Scottish dialect. And I was
we can get Morgan McMichaels to play her in the movie.
Please. Yes.
Get a Scottish queen to play her and we'll get all the bases covered.
But like I was saying, like when I first read it, because I've read this one now 3 times this year alone, because that was my first book of the year.
Oh,
because I wanted to wait and make sure my first book was a possible 5-star, which is what I try to do every year.
Kick off the year right.
And Mel's been like raving about it for like ever to me, and she's like, read it. And I'm like, fine, I'll finally read it. It'll be my first book of the year. And I just loved it. And when Georgia came out, my head just instantly went to Scarlett O'Hara. Like the drama, I gave her a hint of a country accent, but it was like all I could think in my head is, I'm gonna need my fainting couch. Thanks, because it gave me the vapors. Because how high she was, it's like in my head, I just saw this very over dramatic person, and I'm like, yes, just yes.
Yeah, I think over dramatic is a good way to describe her. You're not wrong.
Didn't I buy you Death Prefers Blondes?
No, you bought Death Prefers Blondes for you and sent me the arc so that I would read it.
I sent it to you.
More read it. And I'm going to be purchasing for Christmas. My drag family already knows that each one of them is getting a copy of it because I'm going to be like, read it now because you will fall in love.
Oh, that's
be like, I'm gonna like read it, and then y'all tell me who you think that I said you were in it. Because Georgia is a lot like the matriarch of our family. Because Dia used to be really big, like used to do drugs all the time.
Yeah.
Dia's been sober for 7 years now.
Congratulations.
And I think my drag mom kind of had a hand in that a little bit of helping. Like once she adopted my best friend, she started to sober up more and more the more they hung out.
Yeah.
So it's like she's been sober for 7 years now, and we're just like, and that's what it made me think of was between the two of them, made me think the two of Dia and Arabella. So it's just like, it works out.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Granted, Dia's more the corset made with knives in the boning that she can pull knives out, performed with a dreadlock wig on that had razor blades at the end just so she could cut people in the audience she didn't like. So she's a little bit more intense than Georgia is, but
hey.
I'm just glad you don't wear that wig around me.
Seriously, I need to get that. I need to get one of those. That's how you get your social distance. That's reinforce your social distance. Just whipping people with your razor blade hair.
I whip my hair back and forth.
She would perform songs like that, where she would have the ability to whip her hair.
Oh my gosh! I would cut my own throat by accident.
I'm just like, whatever, you do you. I'm gonna go over here. I'm going to be behind people when they're performing. I'll tip you off stage.
Exactly. Throw my money from the side. Just.
So I want to talk a little bit about The Fellow Dark. This just came out this month, and I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but my plan is
I literally just got my copy on my birthday, so
happy birthday. Yeah, this is hot off the press. It is my latest and my first foray into fantasy, really. Low fantasy, but fantasy.
What
So,
made you decide to do a vampire book?
you know what? I have done several virtual events, and I always have to tell this story, and I always forget to bring my props with me. It started out because I was asked to write a short story for an anthology called Out Now, and I have my copy of Out Now, but it is out of my reach.
Which I read the short. I just got through reading your short story in it.
Oh, great!
I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Dark.
So, but I have an assistant. I have an office assistant who just handed me my copy. But yeah, so I had been invited to write a short story, and I wasn't sure what my angle was going to be. I cobbled together a story about some theater kids, because I was a theater kid, as I've said, and sort of trying to write that. I wanted to sort of write what it feels like to have a crush on somebody and resent them at the same time, which I think is a very common experience for gay boys. But I couldn't really find my way into the story. I started writing it, and it just felt really cliched. It didn't feel like me. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what? I've always wanted, 10 years ago, at the same time that I was working on the screenplay that eventually became Death Prefers Blondes, I wrote a vampire story because I was like, oh, vampire is really big, so I'm going to write a vampire story. And not realizing at the time that I had already missed the trend. It was way too late for me to write a vampire story. But I wrote one, and I liked it. I liked the characters, because Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a huge influence on me creatively. Like, massive. When I say massive, I mean Margot was my take on the Buffy trope, like that character.
I related her to Buffy so many times.
Exactly.
Like Buffy fan, by the way.
Yeah. And so that was sort of my, that was my creative outlet for what Buffy the character meant to me. And so I always kind of wanted to write a vampire story. And I had written this like 10 years ago. And then when I was trying to write the short story, I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to do this. It's a short story, so it's perfect because it doesn't have to carry the book. If people don't like it, they can skip it. But I'm going to have fun with it. So I sat down and I was like, I'm writing a vampire story for people who have read Twilight, who have seen Twilight, who have read and seen the Vampire Diaries, who have seen Buffy, who read the, Charlene Harris books, who watched True Blood, who know all this stuff. I'm not going to surprise them. So what do I do with people who already know all this stuff? And so I kind of created this world where everybody knows about vampires, and I sort of like wink at a lot of the tropes, and I sort of play with them. And I still made it the story about these two theater kids who have this rivalry, but also are attracted to each other. And I had so much fun with it. The story poured out of me. And when I was done, I was like, I love this universe too much to leave it behind. I really want to do more with it. And at that same time, I was coming up on when I had to pitch my follow-up, like what I was going to do after Death Prefers Blondes. I had outlined a whole story, and I'd even started writing it. And after I finished this short story, I said to my editor, I was like, you know what, I actually think maybe, then I read that Renee Adia, she had announced The Beautiful. And I was like, and I was like, we had a record scratch, freeze frame. I was like, this might be, if vampires are coming back, this might be it. And if they're not coming back, this might be it. Like, this might be my one chance to tell this vampire story that I had sort of kicking around for 10 years that I really wanted to do. So I said to my editor, what if vampires and, but gay? And she was like, sure, why not? So, and this is before I knew that Stephanie Meyer was going to have another Twilight book coming out. This was before Zoraida Cordova and Natalie C. Parker had announced the vampire anthology that's coming out this year.
Kristoff and his.
Yeah, and so I sat down and I was like, that vampire story that I wrote 10 years ago, initially it was going to be a quintet. I was so ambitious. And I had written the first book, and I sketched out plots for the remaining 4 books, and I picked it up and I looked at it and I was like, this was so brilliant. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the story that I was going to tell over the course of 5 books and just condense it into one, super book. It'll be like the mega Voltron, vampire saga. And I picked it up and I was reading it and I was like, oh, these are really bad ideas. Like, all this is really bad. It was like really clumsy. Like, I did not do a great job. It was like, I did a good job for where I was as a writer at the time, but I made some mistakes and there were just some things where I was looking at them and I was like, it isn't going to work. But there was one twist, something that I like, an element that I was going to introduce in the 2nd book that was going to pay off in the 3rd book and then come back in the 4th book. It was going to be this sort of like, and I loved it so much. I was like, I want to keep this twist one way or the other. I'm keeping this very specific twist. And so I figured out how I could still tell a similar story using that same twist. So there's a few characters that survived from that story to this book, but it is otherwise a completely different plot. I rethought it entirely, but that is how I came to write about vampires and why this book is coming out right now. But it is very much the vampire story that it's the vampire story of my heart, because it's very much inspired by Buffy and True Blood and the Vampire Diaries and all these things that were really sort of influential to me. But I center this gay teenager who lives in a decaying suburb of Chicago, where nothing ever happens except for, the occasional undead cult rolls into town and tries to kill everybody and bring about the end of the world. And yeah, exactly. And so the vampires are a known entity. They are sort of a nuisance in this city because it is at this intersection of 2 ley lines, and the vibration and the energy attracts supernatural activities. So so basically like a hellmouth. It was my version of a hellmouth. Not exactly like the gateway to hell, but just it was an excuse for it was like a reason, the MacGuffin that justified having paranormal activity happening. Yeah. So this vampire boy approaches him one day and says, that says that August, the main character, is identified as a key figure in an apocalyptic prophecy. And so, of course, at first he thinks he's being tricked, but then as things start to happen that he can't explain, he is forced to confront the possibility that this prophecy may be real. The thing is, he doesn't know if he is destined to save the world or to destroy it. So that's sort of the general plot of the book.
So basically, Angel telling Buffy that first meeting is all I get.
Yeah,
it's a hint of Anne Rice is what I'm getting.
Yeah, there's a little interview with the vampire in there. There's a little bit season 5 of Buffy. There's a little bit season 5 of Angel. There's some stuff in there that fans of the show will definitely be like, oh, okay, I totally but there's a lot in there that is, it's sort of like I wanted to I don't know, I really think that the resilience of the queer community is important to me to capture in books, and there's that in here too. So there's the main character and his best friend is a lesbian. They're the 2 queer kids in their school, and they stick together, and it's I don't know. So for me, it's very much it's Buffy, but it's gay, and it's the story that I always wanted when I was here. This is the story that I needed, and so I put it on paper.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may have had that, the insurgence of vampire stories now, I think probably have a lot of the same backstories as yours, as far as they all had these stories, and then the vampire phenomena came and went, and everybody's like, oh, but I didn't get my story out. Well, and then Renee's book comes out, and everybody's like, oh, we can do vampires again.
Yeah, no, they are coming back, because I mean, and it totally makes sense, because a lot of people, when you kind of cut your teeth on a trend, it really is formative. You know, you think about all the people who sort of got into YA because of the dystopia boom, and people who got in because of the paranormal boom, and people who got in because of, you know, like this, that, whatever, like the John Green stories, and there comes a point at which you know, the market becomes saturated with stories that sort of yeah. And then it becomes like a third rail that nobody can touch. Like for a very long time, nobody wanted vampires, period. And what was really unfortunate about that is that we are finally in a place where we're seeing more diversity amongst, like, on the spectrum of points of view, diversity amongst authors. And that didn't really start to, like, we didn't really start to grow in terms of points of view and authorship until after both of these booms, like until after vampires and dystopian kind of fantasies had already come and gone. Like those huge like tsunamis hit the shore and like pulled back, and then publishing was like, oh, okay, enough of that. And so I think finally we're getting to see some variety. Like we're really starting to get to see diversity. And like I think as they're returning, that's what we're seeing. You know, Renee Adia, her vampire story is like her main character is not white, and you know, mine. Obviously, the main character is gay. The anthology that Zoraida and Natalie are doing is filled with diverse voices, and like I'm so oh, and Isabel Sterling, who I love, who wrote This Coven Won't Break, and These Witches Don't Burn. She's writing a lesbian vampire story that I think is coming out next year, and so I'm here for all of it. Like I think that's phenomenal. Like breathe some new life into these old tropes, and that's something that I also really tried to do with this, because like I said, I started writing The Fell of Dark before I knew that vampires were really coming back, and so I really thought if I'm gonna revisit this, I need to make it worth the reader's while. And so I said, I'm not gonna pretend that we don't all know what we all know already. I'm not going to pretend that these books haven't come out. I'm not going to pretend that readers are going to be surprised by vampires. So I was like, I tried to acknowledge the tropes. I tried to subvert them wherever I could. And when I couldn't subvert them, I tried to queer them, because I'm like, I just still want to make this something that hasn't been done before. Like, not exactly.
I think another thing to keep with the whole bringing vampires back to is, oddly enough, Netflix. Because, okay, for me, Buffy, I love Buffy, and I watched it as it aired every week. It was like, I would have like Buffy viewing parties even, and you know, we'd get together and watch Buffy. But now, you know, Buffy is on Netflix, or it was, and you got like this whole new generation of people watching Buffy, and it's like, I had one kid, one of my daughter's friends years ago, like when Buffy first came onto Netflix, and she was like, oh my gosh, I just watched this show. You should really check it out. It's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I'm like, girl.
Girl, I had a coworker the other day go, have you ever seen the TV show Charmed? I was like, hold on, which version?
Exactly.
Good or crappy? Which version? She's like, big Holly Marie Combs and the one girl that I hated in 90210. She's like Shannon Doherty and Alyssa Milano. She's like, yeah, it's such a brand new show and it's so good. I was like, oh, I feel old.
I know. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. I think
I grew up with. That was my Buffy.
Yeah. No,
that was my Buffy.
I watched Charmed when it was originally. I was part of the original cult following of Buffy, because I also watched it when it first aired, and I could not get my friends to watch it with me. They refused, and so I was like, I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to see it. Like now, it has a real appreciation, and I think I do think it's really fun that a lot of these shows that were so fun for me, because of course there's magic in The Fell of Dark. Also, there's definitely some Charmed in there. There is a series, and this is another book that is on the other side of the room, but there is a series. It's a Swedish paranormal trilogy called the Engelsfors trilogy, and it's by Mats Strandberg and Sarah Elfgren, and it's the first one is called The Circle, and I have the...
That is on a list for me to get because, as she will tell you, that I really read a lot of witch books because that's my main thing, is either that or queer or mysteries.
Yeah. This trilogy, this is the first book. It's in Swedish. I have the trilogy in Swedish. I only have the first book in English, but it's phenomenal, and it also really influenced The Fell of Dark. And I mention it in the acknowledgments of the book, so in case you don't remember, it's in there. But highly recommend reading that. If The Fell of Dark appeals, I highly recommend picking up that trilogy, because I read it in Swedish because I have been trying to teach myself the language. But I also read it in English. Like I believe the English translation is really good, so I highly recommend picking those up.
So the other day, my son, he couldn't sleep, and he was like, "Read to me." And I was busy with my reread of Death Prefers Blondes, and he's like, "Just read where you are, just read it out loud." And I'm like chapter 30 or something. I'm like, I can't just read it from there. And so he was gonna pick out something else, and he's like, just read it. And I was flipped to the beginning, and I just started reading it out loud from the beginning. And he's not a big reader. You know, he doesn't have a lot of interest in books. And so I only got through the prologue and chapter 1. And I was like, okay, you got to go to bed. And he's like, no, you can't stop there. I was like, honey, every chapter ends like that.
I mean, the anxiety of those chapter endings, though.
Thank you.
He's like, you can't just stop like that. He's like, read to at least chapter 5. I said, chapter 5 is going to leave you the same way.
I tried really hard. That's the thing. It's tricky. It's hard to end a chapter the right way. It is harder for me to end a book than it is to find a way to end the chapter, because there's always, in terms of like, especially when you're writing like a thriller, or because I describe Death Prefers Blondes as sort of an action adventure thriller. Like I say, my pitch to people is I say it's an action adventure retelling of Hamlet about a rebel heiress and 4 kickboxing drag queens who run afoul of a deadly international conspiracy. And so it's sort of like trying to keep the action constantly going, like up, and then so it's like, yeah, so you reach the end of like a movement in the story, but there's always another movement coming, so there's always a cliffhanger, there's always a place to like where you're like, pause for breath and continue.
I never connected Hamlet until you said that, and now my brain's like, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's like click 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 click.
Yeah. I
also love how you reference like your other 2 backlists. One of them, to me, as I reference it to people, is like a queer retelling of Gone Girl.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just like, it's the easiest way of like, hey, this is another, if you liked that book, but you hated these certain things in it, read this because it was done, like those tropes and stuff were done slightly better with this type of a story instead of what that gave us.
I definitely, when I wrote Last Seen Leaving, that was it was funny because I always loved missing person stories, and the year that I wrote it, I read Gone Girl, I read The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Chandler, I read The Galton Case by Ross MacDonald, and I can't remember what the other one was, but there was another missing person story that I read that same year, and I was so captivated. I really wanted to write that kind of a story because I love these like open-ended mysteries where because it's not who done it, it's what happened. And it was also at the same time, but I couldn't quite figure out what my in was, how do I tell this story and what's my spin on this story? And at the same time, I had not yet written a story yet. I had not written a story yet that featured a gay protagonist, and I really wanted to do that, but I also couldn't figure out what my in was for that story because at that time it was like 2014, and I'd seen coming out stories on the shelves, but I was like, what do I have to say about it that hasn't been said before? And then I sort of fitted those two ideas together, and I was like, well, what if it's a missing person story, but the main character is this gay teenager who has to negotiate this? And then it just sort of all came together for me. Like, it literally just unspooled in my head, and I sat down. I wrote the story in about 2.5 months. But yeah, so it is very much like a YA Gone Girl, with
a better romance in it.
Well, with a healthy romance in it. But yeah, so it's about a boy who's he's in the closet. His ex-girlfriend disappears, and he has to figure out what happened to her, while at the same time he has to find her while he's also finding himself, basically.
And he's discovering a new man in his life too, and it's just like, wait.
Exactly. And he
Still
starts
one of my favorite gay couples.
Yeah, and he starts to find out that there were things that she was keeping from him. He was keeping secrets from her, but there were things that she was keeping from him as well. So that one was, and it was a whirlwind, because I finished that story and I sent it around. I got an agent within, like, I had my first offer for representation within about 2 weeks. We sold it within about, I think, 6 weeks. So, I mean, really only 3 months passed between when I finished writing it and when we sold it, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
Absolutely remarkable. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. We sold it on my birthday. So I was...
Great birthday present.
I know, yeah. So I was very happy.
And where did you get the idea to do White Rabbit? Because I will say, I picked up White Rabbit originally because of the title.
Yeah.
And then I saw the blood on the cover in the graphs and stuff. I was like, ooh, is this like a horror retelling of Alice in Wonderland? So that's why I picked it up and started reading. And I was like, okay, it's not, but it's a book I feel like I need in my life, because something about it was just like, this is fucked up, and I need to know what about this makes it fucked up.
Yeah.
It's almost like an acid trip in certain spots where I'm just like, huh? That makes perfect sense, but doesn't all at the same time, and my brain's like, ow.
So, yeah, so there were kind of two inspirations for White Rabbit. It started with, I had written, so my debut was set in the fall in the Midwest, and then right after I wrote Last Seen Leaving, I started writing another story that was going to be set in the winter in the Midwest. And like I said, we sold Last Seen Leaving right away. And so I had barely started writing that book when we sold, and immediately I choked, because for the first time in my life, I was writing something where I knew I was going to have an audience for it. Like, before, I was just writing for myself. I was writing for me, and my mom is my beta reader. And I was like, so like, at most 2 people are going to read this, me and my mom. So it doesn't, like, there's no real pressure if I screw it up. But suddenly I was writing, I had sold a book, and we sold it. It was a 2-book deal. And so I knew that whatever I wrote next would also be getting read. So the work was already done for Last Seen Leaving, but now I'm starting from scratch with something new, and people are going to read it. And so the whole time I'm writing, I'm standing over my own shoulder, and I'm going, are you sure about that? Are you sure about that? Is that the right word? Is that paragraph structured correctly? Are you sure you're telling a good story? And suddenly I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I was doing anything right at all. And I stumbled through, I wrote 108,000 words. I cut 20,000 words out of it. I still didn't know if it was any good. And so finally I shelved it. But I had done a book set in the fall, and I'd done a book set in the winter. And I was like, I'm going to continue with this like seasonal imagery. And I was like, set something in the summer. So what does a summer mystery look like to me? And I immediately pictured sort of these, because like Michigan, there's a lot of lakes in Michigan. So I started picturing like these sort of like lakeside, like these cottages by the lake. And I had this image in my head for this kind of like empty cottage at night with the lights on, and there's a corpse on the floor. And I'm like, ooh, how did it get there? And so I started thinking about it. And then my other inspiration for it was Agatha Christie, because I read a ton. That was like the first adult fiction I read was Agatha Christie, because when I was like 12, 13 years old, I was like, that was the adult fiction that I knew, like, because that was a name that I knew. And I picked it up, and they were easy to digest for, like a 13-year-old. But she excelled at these sort of remote locations with a small pool of suspects, and everybody has an alibi that somebody did it. And so that was what I went into this story. I was like, that's what I want to tell. Yeah, I want to tell a story about a murder that takes place where there's a very limited possible number of suspects, and all of them have an alibi, but all of them are lying. So there's this interlocking set of lies that need to be teased apart. You need to figure out who's lying and what they're lying about in order to sort of unlock the, you know, whatever the lie is for the next person's story, to figure that out. So you can figure out what the other lie is. So you can get to the bottom of the onion and figure out what really happened.
In fact, like, that book, like the amount of like, I thought this person did it. And then I was like, the next page was like, no, it's this person. And I was like, well, that one's too obvious of a pick. Way. And then it came back when I was like, wait, maybe it's that one. No, it's this person. And I'm just like, I'm so confused. And I'm usually not confused in murder mystery kind of things.
It was hard, but it was a lot of fun. The really difficult part was, so the story takes place all in one night. Like, it takes place over the course of 8 hours from start to finish. And I submitted it, and I was like, this was hard, and I'm never doing this again. But it was fun, and like, I accomplished something. And my editor was like, I love this, but I'm not sure your timeline matches up. So I had the copy editor look through it, and here's what they had to say. And I'm like, damn it! So I had to go back in, and I had to fix the timeline, because there were things where I was like, it didn't totally match up. Where she was like, she's like, this has got to take at least an hour. This has taken at least 45 minutes. So by this point, it's already 2 a.m. and you're saying it's midnight. And I'm like, don't do this. So I had to go back, and I had to not rewrite, but I had to go through every single page and figure out where we were in the story. I had to sort of estimate how long this takes. And I had to like show my math. I had to do math. It sucked. So I'm never doing it again.
That's funny. Yeah, I started back in November trying to write something, and I wrote like 1,000 words, and then I was like, I don't like how any of the structure goes, so I'm like, it's going to be easier to just do it in like a journal entry kind of thing. So I went back and I was like started writing it in journal entry form, and I think I got about 1,000 words, and I'm like, I don't like how any of this is going.
Well, that's the thing. I wrote all of White Rabbit in third person, and then figured out when I finished it that it needed to be I wrote it first person past, and got all the way to the end before realizing it needed to be first person present. So I had to go through and change the tense, like the entire book. So everything had to move from past tense to present tense, and that sucked. And that was before I had to fix the timeline. But yeah, no, figuring out how to tell the story is as crucial as the story itself. Death Prefers Blondes, I really struggled with, because it was my first real ensemble narrative, and I really struggled with how to present that. And I knew I had to. Eventually, I figured out it had to be third person so that I could really I could jump into anybody's head that I needed to. And I didn't feel like I was restricted to a single point of view. And I didn't want to struggle with writing first person for 5 different characters, like trying to jump from personality to personality in that regard. Because I feel like that, it felt like a trap. It felt too much like a trap designed to get me to sort of forget individual voices. So I told it third person, past tense. And I've been dealing with that because I'm sort of working on putting together something now, and I'm trying to figure out and it's another complicated narrative, and I'm trying to figure out how exactly is the best way to present it. So we'll see. I'm still sort of workshopping that, but it's hard. These are the big questions.
So speaking of things that you're working on, do you have anything coming out in the future? Or
I have 2 more things coming out this year.
Busy.
Oh my gosh, this has been a wild year. So in April I had a Werewolf in Riverdale came out, and this is my first. It's my first foray into intellectual property, like licensed property fiction. And I wrote this is a tie-in with the Archie horror comics series Jughead the Hunger.
Yeah, which I love, and I can't wait to read.
Yeah, I had a blast because I grew up reading Archie comics, and getting to dip my toe into these waters was such a treat. In October, I have it is a tie-in novel with Riverdale, the TV show. There are 4 novels already out with by author Nicole Ostow, who was unavailable to write the 5th one, and so they asked me if I would be willing to tackle it, and I was like, yes, 1,000 times yes. So that is called Riverdale the Poison Pen. It comes out in October. And then also in October, I have a short story in an anthology that is being published exclusively in German. And
one of yours, the girl commenting, Kira Horn, she's in Germany.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Well, hi, Kira. Yeah, that's actually, the irony is we were talking about White Rabbit, and I have the German translation is right here, and it means nobody tells the truth is what it translates to. So that was how they retitled it for German. But the anthology is being compiled and edited by a German author named Christian Handel, and it's called, I'm going to assassinate this pronunciation. It's von Flusshexen und something. It's like river witches and something else. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I'll have to look it up somehow. But it is, so that is only being published in German. So if you can read German, you will you're in for a treat. It's called von Flusshexen und Meerjungfrauen, which is river witches and mermaids.
So I'm going to own a German book to add to the collection.
Exactly. And I wrote it. It's a fairy tale, basically. Thank you, Kira. It is a fairy tale about. It's inspired by a Hans Christian Andersen story, and also a sort of the Orpheus myth. So it's about death, basically. It's a fairy tale about death.
I really wish there was going to be an English translation, because I would so read that. I love fairy tale kind of stories.
There may at some point, I may be able to make it available to English readers, because like I said, it'll be published in German exclusively, but I wrote it in English, so I have the English version. And who knows, maybe I'll do like a Patreon or something, and I'll put it up there for some like tiny.
Oh, or like you did with The Fell of Dark, where
I could also do that.
Thing.
Yeah, I can also do that. So I can. So we'll see. Yeah, but maybe for my next, I can make that available. So yeah, so that is
my pre-order goodies.
Oh yeah. Yay.
Yeah, I wasn't able to pre-order because of the stupid X.
Oh no, that's
and everything that happens. So
I'm sorry.
So I was on a trip when The Fell of Dark came out. And so when I got home, I had box, waiting for me to unbox in my vlog. And this vlog hasn't posted yet, but it's funny because I had 2 boxes, and I was like, oh, I got 2 books come in while I was gone. They were both The Fell of Dark.
Really?
I had to go back and look at my Amazon, and apparently I pre-ordered it in February, and then I pre-ordered it again in May.
Oh no!
I was excited for this book. I pre-ordered it twice.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate
that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that very much.
I was like, yeah, I was really excited for the book.
I guess so. Yay.
It's funny. The trip that I was on was I actually went somewhere you had recommended to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you posted a picture on your Instagram somewhere around the Grand Canyon,
Okay.
And I had commented and said, oh, I was going to take a trip there. I hadn't planned anything.
Oh.
And
yeah.
you're like, oh, well, while you're there, you should go to Sedona and go to Slide Rock. And so we made that part of our trip.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, that was fun. The
Yeah.
water's freezing.
Yeah.
The middle of July in a heat wave. That water's like ice water.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's so like I said, I grew up in Michigan, and it's, you know, you swim in the lakes at your peril, because like the Great Lakes, they are freezing. They're always freezing cold, especially like Lake Superior. It's one of those things where it's like lovely to look at, don't touch. It's so cold.
I wish our lake here in Oklahoma would be like that, because we have our really, really heavy heats, and you go to sit in a water and it feels like it's boiling.
Oh,
And I'm like, no, dirty bird, go away. I'm not getting in the water. It's too hot. Y'all have fun.
Seriously.
Yeah, the water at Slide Rock
outside the water than it does in the water.
Yeah.
Mountain runoff, like glacial.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how it's 110 degrees outside, but the water is like 34.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. No thanks.
And then we did whitewater rafting in the Grand
yeah.
Canyon, which was ridiculously insane, because again, it's like 120 degrees down in the canyon, and the air feels like a hot blow dryer blowing directly in your face, but the water is literally 46 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that is I did whitewater rafting in New Mexico when I was a teenager, and it was like that, where the water was really cold, but it was nice. I mean, refreshing. As long as you're like staying in the raft and you're just kind of like getting the the spray.
Out of the raft because we were like, it's too hot.
Yeah.
We literally jumped out of the raft and let it carry us floating down the river. It was freezing, but it was so worth it to cool off.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I know in your Instagram, you actually post a lot of pictures from all over the world. Do you do a lot of traveling?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the before time, my husband and I lived in Finland for 4 years. And while we were over there, we traveled as much as we possibly could. Every chance we got, we traveled. If we find, discount boat fare, bus fare, train fare, whatever, we would snatch it up and we would travel. So I have a huge backlog of photos from that. But my husband is an EU citizen, and his work takes us back to Europe every year, usually, for several months at a time. And so we'll always try to plan a trip whenever we're back. We'll be based somewhere, but we'll always try to plan a trip to go somewhere and see something hopefully new. Sometimes we go back to favorite places, like we went back to Venice because it's my favorite city. And we've been to Spain a few times. Last year we were in Croatia, we went to Ukraine, we went to Bosnia, we went to Montenegro. So we've been really fortunate to find some really good travel opportunities. But yeah, I love to travel.
So you said Venice is your favorite city, which would explain why
that would explain.
I needed
you had to have traveled there because you knew your way around.
So it was a few things, because when I wrote the screenplay, that whole sequence, Margot has this scene with Dallas, and then she leaves, and in the screenplay it was a car chase. And then when I was adapting it, I was like, I was thinking really hard about where I wanted the locations to be. And initially I had that scene was going to happen in California. And I thought this book is lacking something. And what it is missing is this real international feeling. Like I really wanted to give it, I needed it to have that kind of like glitz. I needed it to have that specific kind of feel to it. So I started thinking, well, what if she leaves California and we have a whole sequence of events that takes place overseas somewhere? And then I was sort of thinking, I was like, what are some places I could have? Paris, I could set it in Berlin or Munich. I came up with all these ideas for different locations, but I kept sort of leaning back to Venice because I love it so much. And we'd been twice. And I was like, I know I could bring this to life on the page. And so we went back a third time, and the whole thing, it was all research. took so many pictures. We traveled to the top of the Carillon, the Campanile in St. Mark's Square, and I was like, this is what it's going to be. This is where it's going to be. I'm going to make this work. And so I sat down and I made it work.
She's going to jump from this.
Exactly. So I hopefully I will be able to set more books in sort of foreign locales in the future. So cross your fingers, because I would love to visit some of those places again in the pages of the book.
See, I will state, I love the fact that when you chose the international town, it wasn't a typical town. It wasn't automatically Paris, France, London, England. It wasn't like the ones that people like go to in their heads. It was like it was like a small, like in my head, the way I pictured it, why she chose this place was it's this tiny area. No one would think to find her. Let's just go, I'm going to go hide for a minute.
Yeah.
It's like running away in the United States to a small town and be like, no one cares about us here. We're going here.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that I considered a number of big cities because, it would make sense that she would end up in another large city somewhere. But it's sort of like, I wanted to contrast sort of like the sprawl of Los Angeles with Venice. It's like the old part of the city. It is on a series of islands. It's small, it is contained, it is very intimate. It is this little, like this warren of these narrow passageways. There are a lot of tourists, but there are so many areas in Venice where you can just disappear, where you step off the main drag and you just vanish. And I really wanted to sort of bring that and like that feeling to it. So, because it's colorful and it's vibrant and it's very Italian, but it's very touristed. So it has an international vibe. Anyway, that was all my reasoning. Plus it had a building that was tall enough that somebody could jump out of it with a parachute.
So for somebody that would go to Venice, like traveling there, visiting for the first time, what is one thing, or more than one thing, that you would recommend go and see or go and do while you're there?
Oh my gosh. So things I would recommend, if you can, take a Vaporetto down the Grand Canal. Take a oh my gosh, what are they called? It's they have you can pay a dear price for a gondola, like you can have a gondolier who will row you around, but they have these for much cheaper. They have these ferries called, it starts with a T and I'm blanking on it, but they are gondolas that will, because back in the day, there were only a few bridges that crossed the Grand Canal, and they used to have these ferry boats that would just take you from one side to the other, and they still have them. There's still a bunch of them, and in locations, like strategic locations, where you want to get from one side of the canal to the other, and you don't want to walk all the way to the Ponte di Rialto. The traghetto, that's what they are, the traghetti. And there are a bunch of those, and so you can pay just like a couple of euros, and a guy will row you across the Grand Canal, but you get that gondola experience. Get a gelato or an affogato anywhere. There are stands all over the place.
So anything that ends with O's.
Yes, exactly. And then otherwise, my advice is bring a map and get lost. It's really, really, really easy to get lost because it's very confusing there, but you will discover stuff. Like everywhere you go, there is something beautiful to look at. Like it's gorgeous. So I actually have my map of Venice right here, and as you can see, it's like I don't know if you can see, but it's just all these like little, and these aren't even all the little passageways. They mark as many of them as they can, but it's sort of like you will get lost. So just carry it with you and enjoy being lost for a while. It's a small place, so you'll find your way back out eventually, but you'll see a lot of beautiful stuff while you're there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love traveling. I want to go everywhere and see everything and do everything. And I was totally going to do that this summer, but Corona
Yeah.
stopped all that. I actually had to cancel. I had flights already booked. I had to cancel all that. Yeah, I was going to spend a month and a half bouncing around Europe, but I didn't
Which
get
is
to.
why our readathon takes place in July instead of June, because she was going to be gone all of June.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were supposed to be in Europe, and we were going to be getting ready to leave like now.
Yeah, I was. We actually had this live show planned for now because I was going to be getting back from Europe on the 16th. That was I was going to be gone this June 2nd through July 16th.
Yeah.
And I still got back on the 16th, but that was back from the Grand Canyon.
Okay.
It was only a week instead of a month and a half.
Yeah. Well.
So where are you once you're able to travel again, once the world opens back up, where are you off to next?
Probably back to Finland. Like we still have friends there. It's a place that's dear to our heart because we lived there for a while. And then beyond that, I'm not really sure. We've talked a lot about wanting to, it's always do we revisit a place that we loved or do we try to find a new place?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, last year we discovered Croatia, which was gorgeous, and I would love to go back. I'd love to see some other parts of Croatia because we only saw a couple of parts of the country. We've never been to Greece, and
we'll just go there too.
Yeah, and so like I said, there's options. There's stuff. We always sort of look into and see what the best deals are and kind of go that way. But so we'll see.
I'm trying to do we started talking about doing a family trips instead of like gifts for Christmas and birthdays and all of that. And so we've been like coming up with ideas for cool trip ideas and separating them into two different categories. We've got fall/winter or spring/summer, and put each idea on a little piece of paper and put them into like a hat or something. And we're gonna draw that and be like, okay, this is our trip.
Oh, I love it. I actually really like it.
Fall/winter. This is our trip for the spring/summer.
And then pick your.
Can I just say, you and I need to do a Venice trip, Death Prefers Blonde style, and be Margot and try to go to almost every place Margot went to in it.
I highly recommend
it would be interesting and be really fun for at least us.
We could take a picture of the book at the top of that.
Yes,
tower.
Please do.
I am not jumping out of any tower with any parachute.
I mean, I would do it.
I barely got on that airplane to go to Salem, Massachusetts, so I don't do heights.
I highly recommend seeing everything that is described in the book because all of those locations are great. So you can't go wrong.
It would just be fun, and we could put on wigs and put the glasses and put the hat on with the book in between us at the hotel and the places. And I'm just like,
well, I would love it.
Yes. We could do it like book-related travels. Find a next place in a place, and we go to all those places.
Exactly.
I am down. Oh, Kira says winter in Germany is great.
I've been to Germany, but I have not been in the winter, so I would love to see it.
Yeah, we went to. Kira is a former exchange student that she lived with us for a year.
Oh, great.
And I thought that's who that was, but I wasn't going to say anything because I was like, I didn't want to seem dumb.
So, a few years ago, we got to go to Germany and go to her prom and graduation, and
that's so nice.
They showed us all around like Hamburg and Lübeck and.
Oh yeah, of course. I have been to Hamburg. My husband's aunt lives in that area, so we went and we were there. We went around.
It was pretty cool, and we went during the summer. It was actually during the oh gosh, what was it? Some big government thing. I don't know. And like the city was shutting down, and we just happened to get there like where we could visit the city like that one day before everything got shut down and you couldn't go in and out of Hamburg because of all the political people that were there.
Interesting.
But
Got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like my mom used to live in Germany, but she's a military vet, so they traveled around and she lived in Germany for 3 years.
Oh, cool. Wow. Very international. Look at us.
Well, I know I told you that this live show would probably only go about an hour, and we're now at an hour and a half. This has been so much fun talking to you.
We
And
have so many books to talk about, though.
I know.
We have a stack. Becoming Cassandra Clare.
Well, ask an author to talk about their books, and 6 hours later.
We're big fans, so
Thank you.
Like I told you on, I don't remember, was it Instagram or Twitter that I stated that you have became my favorite male author.
Oh,
Just
yeah. Yes.
these books have touched my heart each different ways, and me wishing I had these back in high school. Because the only thing we had was hidden in the very, very back.
Yeah.
Something like Rainbow Boys.
Yeah.
And teachers and stuff would look at us weird if we checked them out. We were reading them in class and things.
Yeah.
So it's like having things like this back here, I would have had a field day because I'm a huge mystery fan and a huge like James Patterson fan and stuff like that. So it's like to have the mysteries and the adventures.
Yeah.
And not be
yeah, that's where I was as well. I was I write the kind of books that I wish I could have had when I was a teenager. Is basically what it amounts to. So
yeah, they do say, write what you know, write what you love, and it will show. And you do an amazing job, and we love your books and adore you. And it's been a pleasure having you join us. And I think Clint and I both screamed when I got the message from you saying that yes, you would do it. We both I had to like video chat him to let him know, and we both were like
well, thanks. That means a lot to me. I was honored to be asked, so thank you. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Do what, Clint?
I said no problem. And I know we've got what's his name that lives in England who read the group book. Gecko on Twitter. I can't think of his actual name to save my life right now.
I know that several people to, I'm not sure why we haven't had a bigger turnout in the live show. I guess maybe people will watch it later. I try to pick a time that will work for people all over, like in the UK.
A lot of our people in England
read the first bonds for this readathon.
Yeah.
And introduced a lot of new people to your books, and I love that. I love every time I find a book that I'm just like passionate about, and I just want to tell the entire world about it. And I'm like, I will shove it down your throat if I have to.
I mean, almost every video since I've read at least one of your books has been mentioned in almost every last one of my videos.
Oh my gosh. Thanks.
I'm like between you, I don't know who gets talked about more, you or Adriana Mather in my videos. So
Adriana and I are agency siblings. We have the same agent.
Yes, I found that out by talking with Adriana because I'm really close friends with Adriana now.
Oh, very cool.
We were talking and I had mentioned that I've been reading your books. And she's like, about time you read them.
Oh my gosh.
Those would be perfect books for you.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, I love her. She is great. So, and I love her. It's always fun for me reading books by other authors that are represented by my agency, reading books that are published by my publisher because I like it, and that my editor has worked on, because I sort of see similarities in our work, and I see what how other people see. I don't know. It's always very enlightening for me to see what we have in common and why we share this sort of professional aspect.
Okay, with with saying that, is there one book not by you that you think more readers should either look out for because it's about to come out, or a book that you love that you think we need? This is a question we ask all the authors.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to say be on the lookout for Adam Sass's debut, Surrender Your Sons, which is a thriller.
Already
downloaded. Yeah, I've read it. I read not the final version of it. I know that he made some changes to it since then, and he has said that the changes he made, he is so pleased with. He said it's stronger than ever. So I'm really looking forward to sort of getting my hands on the kind of like finished version. And then I just want to, and then I'll re-recommend that trilogy I mentioned earlier, the Englesforth trilogy. The first one is called The Circle. The second one is called second one is called Fire, and the third one is called The Key. And I highly recommend those. So
I've just added both of those, the Adam Sass book and the Eggers book, to my Goodreads.
Excellent.
Want to read.
But yeah, I've got Surrender Your Sons. I got that from, NetGalley.
Oh, great.
I've just, because of the subject matter in parts of it, I'm like, every time I go to want to read it, I'm like, and the subject matter, I'm like, let's wait a second.
Yeah,
it's getting closer to publication, seeing as it's been pushed back. That way I can give a more honest review when the book comes out.
Yeah.
And I have in my hands because that is a beautiful cover.
It's tough. It is tough subject matter, but he handles it really well. He handles it with and he handles it with humor and with, it's not, it's hard, but it's a story of again, it's a story of queer resilience and heroism, and so it's ultimately, it is an empowering book.
I'm also excited for Cemetery Boys. I've heard really good things about that.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for that. I cannot wait.
Mm-hmm.
I keep seeing that like all over Twitter and Instagram.
And I just read
those books on pre-order lists.
And I also want to recommend Wendy Hurd has a her YA book She's Too Pretty to Burn, which is kind of like it's inspired by the picture of Dorian Gray, and it's about two queer girls, and it's sort of like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's really atmospheric. It's really it's creepy. It's thrillery. It's really good. So I highly recommend that too.
Okay, that's going on a list now. We'll be getting that.
Yeah.
There was a readathon challenge, and it was a genre you want to read more of. And the book that I picked for that particular challenge was Death Prefers Blondes. And when I was trying to describe it, I was like, I don't really know what genre this fits in, but I'm just like, it's kind of a little bit of mystery. It's a lot of action, adventure.
Yeah.
But I need more books like this in my life, because this is amazing.
Well, thank you.
Can we also praise this year, though? The one thing I will give 2020 is the amount of awesome queer releases.
Oh, yeah.
This is the largest I've ever seen in 1 year alone, and they're all so diverse.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting more each year, and I think that that's incredible.
That may be the only good thing about 2020.
It is the only good thing about it. Well, that and the fact that my boyfriend broke up with me, I'll actually take that as a good thing. Because I live here now and I am starting a new chapter, so I take that as a positive.
Yes. Well, good. That should be the way it is.
Don't date children. So
always sound advice.
The 8-year age gap.
A whole year. Wow.
No, 8 years.
Oh, 8 years. Oh, okay.
Years.
I'm sorry. I thought you were like a year, and I was like,
he's 22 years younger. He is 22 years old, and
okay,
it's like 8 years.
That's Yeah, that's a lot of life experience, particularly in the gay world. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we won't keep you any longer because we've already kept you like an hour and 40 minutes. And it's been amazing. And we've had such a wonderful time. And I can't think of any other questions to ask, although I'm sure I will later. But
Well, I really appreciate it. I always love the opportunity to talk with readers, to talk about books, to talk with people who are as enthusiastic about these stories as I am. So I really appreciate it. This was really fun.
also, for anybody that's watching this that wants to continue with chatting with at least Clint and I live, we're going to do, oh, hold on. Faye Fine says she loved the book.
Oh, well, thank you.
And so does Crystal.
Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate it.
But if anybody else wants to hang out and chat some more with Clint and I live, we're going to come back on at 7 p.m. Eastern time for a little bit of a drunk after hours live show.
I mean, I did get this for my birthday. I need to try it. So I
excellent.
keep the bottle.
Do it.
So, yeah,
I love it.
we have some dinner and then come back with some alcoholic beverages.
Excellent. That's the way it should be done.
And more than likely nerdy gaming happening out in the living room.
Fabulous.
Because that's what happens in this house.
Great. Well,
so until next time, everybody, thanks for being here. And remember to always be completely you. Bye.
bye.